Welcome to an edition of CCSD Living Environment. We know that in our cells, if we're going to undergo mitosis, then what's happening is we're either repairing cells, replacing them, or we're using the process to grow. But there are some organisms that actually use the process strictly for reproduction, to make new individuals. And those organisms undergo what we refer to as asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, it's the production of genetically identical offspring from a single parent. The offspring have the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. They are, remember, completely identical on every level. Asexual reproduction occurs rapidly and produces a large number of offspring. Generally speaking, if I asked you for an example, you would tell me bacteria are an example of an organism that undergoes asexual reproduction. And you're right. If we start with one bacteria right now today, in 24 hours we have 1 million bacteria. It happens very, very quickly and in a relatively short amount of time. So let's go through and look at the different types of asexual reproduction. The first one, so I'm trying to draw a bacteria for you. The process is called binary fission. Fission meaning to split, bi meaning two, so it literally just splits in two. Generally, this occurs in a prokaryotic cell, like bacteria. So let's do a couple definition things here. We know that prokaryotic cell means that there's no nuclear membrane, and we know that mitosis is the division of the nucleus. So by technical definition, is this really an example of mitosis? And hopefully you're thinking no, because prokaryotic cells don't have a nuclear membrane. But for all intents and purposes, that's what we're going to refer to this as. Asexual reproduction and its mitosis. So in the next one, again, a very similar picture, okay? I have my organism, unicellular, and it splits in two. So the process, again, is known as binary fission, but this time it's occurring in eukaryotic cells like paramecia or amoeba. These would be examples of the organisms that we saw when we looked at the pond water. So when we looked under there, those unicellular organisms we were looking at, many of them use asexual reproduction. So now, based on definition, eukaryotic cell has a nuclear membrane, mitosis, nuclear division. Is this an example? And yes, it is. Another example here, I have a larger yeast cell, and growing or budding off of that, I have a smaller yeast cell. Notice here that we see things that are very much the same. This process is known as budding, and it occurs in yeast. This type of division is characterized by equal division of the nucleus. You can see they are the same, but unequal division of the cytoplasm. Notice this cell is much larger than this one is. And so another example of an organism that undergoes budding is called a hydra. Again, these guys live in our local fresh pond water, but they're a little more complex. Yeast are unicellular. Hydra are made up of many cells, not quite to our complexity. But you can see here the little guys budding off of it, and when we're all done, I have my original, and then I have the bud. So again, the process is known as budding, occurs in an organism known as a hydra, and it's characterized by equal nuclear division. So the chromosomes and the nuclear information divides completely equally and evenly, but the cytoplasm divides unequally. And you can see that because this one is clearly larger than this one. So that would be unequal division of the cytoplasm. And the next guy, the picture looks kind of funny. You've got a little bit better one there with your note. So here I have what we refer to as a planaria, or a flatworm. And here he is just kind of doing his thing. These are microscopic worms, by the way. And I made a cut in the top of his head. And what that'll do is it'll cause him to form two heads. I read an article that said that they made 8 different cuts, so it actually had 16 heads on one body. So this process they refer to as regeneration. It occurs in flatworms, can occur in some amphibians and reptiles. It may result in a new organism from a part that is lost. Now you may be familiar with it with a salamander, that if you grab his tail, he'll lose his tail so he can run away. You're left with the tail, and he'll regrow that tail. If you keep the tail, it doesn't regrow a new salamander. Although with a starfish, If you take a starfish and you break it and you throw both pieces back in thinking you've killed it, both pieces will actually become, if it was just a piece, or stay, if it's what you broke from, a new starfish. So when people go out and think they're destroying all these starfish by breaking pieces, all they're doing actually is increasing the population. So regeneration does exactly that. It will regenerate or give you back something else. Another example here, what I'm trying to draw, here's my piece of bread, the brown part, and then the black are the pieces of bread mold. And then from one of those pieces of bread mold, I get these little black things, which are known as spores. The same thing is true with a mushroom. Mushrooms will do this. Like if you have a mushroom growing in the ground, underneath the mushroom, it'll drop spores. So the process is known as sporulation. It occurs in bread molds and mushrooms, which are both fungus. The parent forms special cells, which are known as spores. They're enclosed in a protective capsule, and they stay dormant until environmental conditions are favorable. What does that mean? It means until you have the right temperature, maybe the right pH, the right amount of moisture, if it needs some type of soil or other substrate to grow on. So until it has all the things that it needs, those spores won't grow. They stay dormant. They're ready, but not yet. And kind of like a seed. You can have seeds in your garage or in your basement for quite some time. And until you expose them to the right conditions, those seeds aren't going to grow. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about asexual reproduction that can occur in plants. And that process is called vegetative propagation. It's a type of regeneration that occurs in plants. The formation of new individuals by mitosis. It does not require gametes, which would be sex cells like sperm and egg. It doesn't require flowers. And if it doesn't require the sperm and egg, then it doesn't require fertilization either. So the first few that we're going to look at are what we refer to as natural vegetative propagation. So these things occur in nature all the time. And the first one, what I'm trying to draw for you here, is a bulb. So, yep, this would be like an onion, which sort of looks like an onion. Or maybe a tulip if somebody at your house plants bulbs outside and then you get the flowers in the spring. It is a bulb. It's an enlarged underground stem surrounded by leaves. So all of the nutrients that it needs are in that bulb, and it will continue to grow. And they will actually produce and keep producing new ones from that original one. Okay, so another example, again, I'm trying to give you a picture, but it's not working very well. What I'm trying to show you is I have the plant above ground, and then below ground, yes, there's roots, but there's these things here that we call tubers. A tuber is an enlarged underground stem that has the bud in the stored food. So what's the example of a tuber? That would be like a potato. And you've heard the eye of the potato is what's going to turn into a new plant and give you more potatoes. And that's why it can do that. It's actually a type of asexual reproduction, which is great if you liked the first potato. But if it didn't have a taste or texture that you liked, you're just going to keep getting the same thing. Because remember, with asexual reproduction, we're just going to keep getting the same traits that we had in the one that they're all coming from. Another example of natural vegetative propagation is in something called a runner. So what we're trying to show is here's the plant above ground, and then it sends this runner along the surface of the ground, and eventually it'll decide to root, and I get another plant. Send another runner, it roots, I get another plant. So it's a stem that grows along the ground, and at different points new roots will penetrate and you'll get a new plant. And the example here and what we're trying to show are strawberries. That's how strawberry plants, instead of, you may plant one little strawberry plant, but within a short amount of time you've got this like huge strawberry patch. And that's because it sends out this runner that goes, and when it finds a good place, it'll root, grow a new plant. Send out a runner, root, grow a new plant. Send out a runner, root, grow a new plant. And it's a natural process. That's how they grow. To make copies of a plant with desired characteristics, sometimes things called cuttings or graftings are used by horticulturalists. Horticulturalists are people that basically grow plants. They make an identical copy of a plant or produce offspring from seedless plants. What's the problem with seedless plants? If plants don't have seeds, how is that plant going to make more of itself? Well, it can't. So basically, we need to do it for it. Or if you've ever been in someone's house and next to the sink they've got all these cups with different leaves from plants in it, and they're telling you, oh, I'm starting a new plant. And you're like, all you have is a leaf. Well, because when you put that leaf in there, that leaf potentially will be able to grow roots, and you can then take that and plant it. So hopefully what you're starting to see here is this doesn't really happen in nature like these other ones did. This one is happening because we are making it happen, so we call that artificial vegetative propagation. So what is the case of a cutting? With a cutting, we take a stem or a leaf and we put it in water or soil, and a whole new plant will grow. For many of you, when you look in the back of my classroom, you've seen the Swedish ivy that's hanging, maybe you've seen the spider plants, maybe you've seen the philodendron. Those are all of those hanging plants that are back there. Well, how did I get them? Somebody had a leaf, and I took the leaf and I put it in water, and as I left it over time, it grew roots. And from there I was able to put it in soil, and now I have a whole new plant. That's not the normal way that plants undergo reproduction. Plants produce sperm and egg similar to the way we do that, and the sperm and egg come together at fertilization to give us a new plant. So that's something that I'm doing to give me a plant similar to the one that I saw. Why? Because I really liked that first plant and I wanted one. Another example of artificial vegetative propagation is called grafting. So what I'm trying to show is, here's my first stem, or my first branch, if you will. Here is my other stem or branch. So I cut this one to a point, and then I put a little notch in this one. So then what I do is I push them together. I push them in so the one that I had the notch cut in and the one that I cut to the point actually fit together. Then I wrap them with gauze or some type of cloth to hold them in that position so they can't come apart. So with a grafting, the stem of one plant is attached to the end cut of another. They do that with trees. So let's say that I had an apple tree that grew really, really well. And it had nice roots and it had good leaves and it was a very solid tree. And it gave me some apples that were okay. But then a friend of mine had another apple tree that produced these awesome apples that I really, really liked. But I knew I wouldn't be able to get the whole tree. So what you could do is take the branch from the tree whose apples you really liked and make that little split in the branch of the tree that you have, put the two of them together, and then wrap that up. And eventually it will grow into itself so you don't need the gauze there anymore. But what you're doing is you're actually forcing the tree that you have that had really good growth, but you didn't love the apples, and it will actually grow the apples from that other tree. That's pretty cool. And they do that sometimes. So it may be, let's say, a red delicious tree, but it's going to give me Honeycrisp apples. And so genetically, the branch, the branch that I grafted on is from a different tree, but it's now growing on my other tree. So you actually have two different types of apples that could grow on the same tree. You can see where that would be artificial vegetative propagation. So what are the advantages of artificial vegetative propagation? Why go through and do these cuttings or graftings? Why bother taking the time? First of all, because it's fast. You don't have to wait for things to grow from a seed. You don't have to wait for fertilization. You will get a very large number of offspring produced because, remember, it is a type of asexual reproduction. It is a type of mitosis, and that happens very quickly. It will produce for us seedless fruit. This is how we make seedless fruit. No plant is going to go through and say, hey, I've got good characteristics. It's okay if I'm seedless and I don't pass any of my stuff on. No way. That plant's thinking, hey, I want to survive into the next generation. I need to pass my genetic material along. So seedless fruit is not something that occurs in nature. It's something that we do. And finally, you're going to get everything the same. So that's an awesome thing if you really like the trait that was being expressed. For example, I love those Honeycrisp apples. Well, if when I put that on there, I didn't put on the branch from the tree whose apples I really loved, I may not like it. So it's great because they're all the same, and that's the thing with asexual reproduction or mitosis. It's a good thing because it's all the same. But if there's something you don't like about what's all the same, or if there's something that's bad about it, then all you're going to get is the stuff that you didn't like, or whatever that bad characteristic was. So that takes us through and talks a little bit about asexual reproduction, some organisms that use it to produce new individuals to continue their species, and some ways that we have found to manipulate it for plants, for things that obviously we need plants, the ecosystem needs plants, and you can see some of the benefits to undergoing artificial vegetative propagation. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.